Story 1. Story 2. We were in the remote Siberian wilderness, knee-deep in permafrost research when we found her. Perfectly preserved in the ice, her body was unlike anything we had ever seen, skin pale but intact, as though she had been asleep for millennia. Our instruments placed her age at over 40,000 years. We were stunned. Driven by curiosity, we began to defrost her, expecting nothing more than a lifeless corpse to study. But she breathed. Her chest rose and fell as if the thousands of years trapped in ice meant nothing. I watched in disbelief as her eyes opened, dark, vacant pools that seemed to peer into a world I couldn't understand. She tried to speak, but the language was foreign, ancient. Her voice was weak, her movements slow. We didn't know what to do except continue thawing her. But soon, something far worse came to light. She wasn't just alive. She was pregnant. Her belly swelled as warmth returned to her body, and within hours she was writhing in agony, her hands clutching at her abdomen. We couldn't communicate, couldn't comfort her, but the urgency was undeniable. She was in labor. I'll never forget the birth, the blood, thick and dark, pouring from her as her screams grew louder, filling the small lab. Her eyes never left mine, wide and full of some twisted knowing. When the creature slid out of her, it was no child. It was a monster. I recoiled as it slithered out of her, gray, wet, and wrong. Its limbs were too long, its skin too slick. A high-pitched screech pierced the air, and its claws tore through the floor with unnatural strength. The woman, her body decaying rapidly before my eyes, cackled a horrible, grating sound. It was as if she had always known what she carried within her, something ancient and malevolent. The creature grew rapidly, its twisted form becoming more grotesque with each passing second. It turned on one of my colleagues before we even had a chance to act, tearing into him with claws sharper than any blade. His screams cut through me as blood sprayed the walls, and the creature fed. We tried everything, bullets, fire, but nothing worked. It was as if the creature wasn't truly physical, something that belonged more to the darkness than to our world. It grew stronger, feeding on us, one by one. Now, I'm alone. The woman's laughter still rings in my ears, even though her body decayed into dust the moment the creature emerged. The air is thick with death, the stench almost unbearable. I can hear it outside, clawing at the door. Its breath is heavy, wet, like the sound of something dying but not quite dead. I don't have long left. I can feel it in my bones. But worse than the fear is the knowledge that whatever we unleashed isn't staying here, it's going to spread. And there's nothing I can do to stop. https://anyw.reddit.com/r/page-turner627horror/comment/1fr9dlw/_gave_we_had_2 https://new.reddit.com/r/page-turner627horror/comment/1ftm1iu/cold_grip. Story 3. The scent of wood smoke and pine needles, usually comforting, felt tainted. Red Riding Hood, or Rosie as she was known in the village, clutched the basket tighter. Inside, nestled amongst a checkered cloth, was a steaming bowl of her grandmother's favorite rosemary and wild mushroom soup. Grandma hadn't been well lately, a persistent cough racking her frail body, and the soup was Rosie's remedy. The path through the woods was normally dappled with sunlight, but today felt oppressive. Shadows seemed deeper, and the birds were eerily silent. Rosie pushed down a prickle of unease, telling herself it was just the gloom of the coming evening. She hummed a little tune, forcing cheerfulness into the air. Then she heard it. A snapping twig behind her, too heavy for a squirrel. She glanced back, expecting a deer perhaps, but the trees hid the source of the sound. She increased her pace, the soup sloshing gently in the bowl. A low growl, a guttural rasp, broke the silence. Closer now. Rosie's cheerful tune died in her throat. She turned again, heart hammering against her ribs. And then she saw it. It was a wolf. But wrong. Horribly, sickeningly wrong. It was gaunt, its ribs visible beneath patches of stringy, singed fur that looked more like burnt tendrils than hair. Bloody streaks crisscrossed its body, not neat wounds, but ragged, oozing trails that traced grotesque patterns on its hide. Parts of its flesh looked melted, as if scarred by fire, revealing glimpses of raw, pink muscle beneath. Its eyes were not the intelligent amber of a normal wolf, but bloodshot, burning red pinpricks that seemed to bore into her soul. The wolf moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, almost dragging itself forward, yet it was impossibly fast. It didn't snarl with rage, but with a sound that was closer to a pained whimper, yet laced with an undercurrent of predatory hunger. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped Rosie. This was no fairytale wolf in disguise. This was something broken, twisted. Something that had crawled out of a nightmare. She tried to run, her boots churning through the leaf litter, the basket swinging wildly. The wolf was behind her, its ragged breathing a wet, rasping sound that echoed in the silent woods. She could smell it now, a cloying stench of burnt meat and something metallic, like old blood. "Leave me alone," she cried, her voice cracking with terror. It was a pathetic plea, swallowed by the oppressive woods. The wolf didn't respond, didn't acknowledge her words. It just relentlessly pursued her, its presence an encroaching wave of dread. It was closer now, its shadow stretching long and distorted in the fading light. Rosie stumbled, her ankle twisting on a root. She fell heavily, the basket flying from her grasp, the lid clattering open and the soup spilling onto the forest floor, a fragrant, steaming offering that went unnoticed. She scrambled back, scrambling away from the approaching horror. The wolf was upon her, its hot, fetid breath washing over her face. She saw its teeth, yellowed and broken, stained crimson at the edges. Somehow, she made it to Grandma's cottage, fumbling with the latch, bursting through the door and slamming it shut behind her. She slumped against the wood, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma," she sobbed. "Grandma, help me." Silence. The cottage felt cold, still. Too still. Rosie pushed herself up, fear warring with a desperate hope. "Grandma," she called again, her voice trembling. She crept into the living room. And stopped. Her grandmother was sitting in her rocking chair by the fireplace, just as usual. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were open, staring blankly ahead, wide and vacant. And then Rosie saw it, the clean, horrific severance at the neck, the dark, thick blood that had soaked into the lace collar of her nightgown and dripped onto the hearth. Grandma's head had been removed. Rosie screamed, a raw, primal sound that ripped through the silence of the cottage. Her mind struggled to comprehend the brutality, the utter violation of her safe haven. Then, the door splintered inwards. The wolf was there, framed in the shattered doorway, its burning red eyes fixed on her. No longer hesitant, no longer rasping weakly. It moved with a terrifying, focused purpose now. Rosie backed away, stumbling over a rug, scrambling for anything to defend herself. There was a heavy iron poker by the fireplace. She grabbed it, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it. The wolf stalked forward, unhurried, unyielding. It was not deterred by the poker, not even slightly threatened. It radiated an air of ancient, implacable malice. Rosie swung the poker with all her might, connecting with the wolf's flank with a sickening thud. For a moment, she dared to hope. But the wolf didn't even flinch. It simply turned its head, its red eyes burning bright. Story 4: Get ready to be terrified with 11 horror stories that will haunt you forever. Volume 2. This chilling collection of real-life horrors will keep you on the edge of your seat for a full 50 minutes. From supernatural encounters to spine-tingling experiences, these true stories will make you question what's lurking in the dark. Each tale is more unsettling than the last, and by the end, you'll be wondering if you're truly alone. Don't watch alone, prepare yourself for a night of fear you won't forget. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more haunting stories like this one. Share your real-life incidents and experiences in the comments or email at spectralstories24@gmail.com. Story 5, Story 6/Part 2/. To read Part 1, click here, https://www.reddit.com/r/horror stories/comments/1g5u8ux/the_record_label_i_for_task_me_with. The files from the unaccounted for computer have parasitically attached themselves to my life over the last few days and have taken up most of my time and attention. With the way things have been going, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little scared. I haven't listened to much else, despite being a prolific music listener and audiophile all of my life. I've developed a kind of obsession with these songs. I've come to know them like the back of my hand. Well, more or less. I came to know the lyrics, structure, instrumentation, arrangement, etc. of each song, and that's given way to a series of dizzying problems. Going back to my previous post, I mentioned how on first listen while in the basement, I had a strong feeling that there was something wrong with the songs. I don't just mean with the strange behavior of the files but with the music itself. It really came off as ominous and threatening. Naturally, I assumed that becoming familiar with them, I would gradually outgrow those feelings. The opposite has happened. I mean, I did eventually overcome my fear of the music itself. In fact, I find it to be quite profound and interesting. But something else is wrong. I honestly don't know how to write about this in a way that comes off as reasonable, so I'll just write it as it has happened and let it stagger you the same way it did to me. The songs are changing. In multiple ways. It all started with trivial lyric changes that I chalked up to memory distortion. At first I would notice how one word would change for another that sounded very similar to it, etc. I obviously thought that I clearly had not listened to the lyrics carefully enough, that perhaps I was mistaking the song structure. But then, it started to become clear that something really wrong was happening. Entire lines would change. At first the lyrics of one verse would swap with another, but eventually I was listening to completely new words that I knew for sure were not initially there. I tried to convince myself that it was just me, and that the mysterious origin of the files was feeding into my perception of them. I needed to gain some clarity. I made a few notes regarding simple empirical things that could be known about the songs. I wrote down the lyrics for each song, as well as their root key and length. I first started to notice varying lengths in the files when I went for a run that always takes me 40 minutes to complete. By then, I knew without question that the full length of the project ran 38 minutes in total. When I reached the end of my run, the project was still running. It went on for a full 7 minutes longer than possible, clocking in at 45 minutes. I checked the time to confirm the phenomenon and it was 100% due to variations of time in the songs. Then, bigger changes began to happen. Entire structural changes were occurring within the songs. Verses and choruses were being switched around and arrangements played by specific instruments were being replaced with others, along with general differences in tonality, sometimes by as little as a quarter tone to as drastic as a couple of whole tones. Recently, I clocked a song running for a full 13 minutes when I had recorded its length at just under 5 minutes. How can it be possible that the musical content of these files is changing? I haven't even mentioned what is the most unnatural and terrifying thing about this whole affair. The content of the lyrics seem to be aware of who I am, what I am doing and what I am thinking. I don't want to include too many details about my personal life, but I'll say that throughout my life I have had a very difficult relationship with a particular member of my family, and that 2 days ago I had a falling out with this person that was way more destructive and toxic than any previous one. There have been many, but this may truly be the last. In as few words as possible, I went through something unspeakable for many years during my childhood, and this family member revealed that they knew exactly what was going on and did nothing to help. After this confrontation I came home in a daze. I felt like my mind and body were going to give out. I've been sober for over 14 years and I'd never truly considered drinking or consuming drugs again for over 10. I was so tempted to make a quick stop before getting home to make the pain go away. But I did what I've done for the past 14 years that has never failed me, losing myself in a room filled with music. As soon as I arrived home, I quickly went up to my studio and put on a special playlist that I've curated over the years for when things get rough. I slowly started to come around and feel a little better. I remember I was listening to a J.J. Cale song when suddenly the song was cut off and a song that I immediately recognized as part of the Infinite Error folder started playing. Strange, I thought, but didn't hesitate in just replaying the song I was previously listening to. But it happened again. In the moment, I said fuck it and just kept listening. I had bigger problems to attend to than worrying about some computer glitch. I wasn't exactly in the mood for that kind of music, but there was something exhilarating about the song that I found distracting in a way that I really needed. Then it started happening again. The song was changing. But this time, the lyrics were unmistakably about me. About my past. I will not go into detail about what it said, but the lyrics were a perverse and cruel poem about my childhood, describing things that are so specific to my memories that I was left with no doubt in my mind that something evil and demonic was happening with these songs. It's impossible to explain how crushed I felt in that moment. I struggled to turn off the music and my computer because my hands were shaking horribly. I felt as if the entirety of creation and its spiritual underside had spat on my face. I am lost. I am at my weakest. And I have no explanation for what is going on. I'll be updating with another post soon. /part 3 https://www.reddit.com/r/horror stories/comments/1g6pdig/the_record_label_I_work_for_tasked_me_with